really well. I think everybody would agree. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the man of the hour.
Yes. Coming back there. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you to the Grind Rail Trail Cafe for hosting us. Everyone buy lots of coffee, lots of croissants, lots of whatever they're making behind the counter. Tip generously. Thank you for opening up your business to us. Thank you each for making some time to welcome a stranger from far west Texas. Not such a stranger because this is our second visit to New Hampshire. And it's great to be here in a land where people wear coats in April. Not something that we're used to back home in El Paso, Texas, where I am from, in the Chihuahuan Desert, in the Rocky Mountains, 4,000 foot base elevation in El Paso, Mount Franklin around us, the Juarez Mountains across the Rio Grande River within sight from our front porch. This beautiful binational community, very different part of America than where we are right now. That's where I grew up. That's where my folks raised me. That's where Amy and I are raising our 3 kids. Ulysses, who's 12, Molly, who's 10, Henry, who is 8 years old. Growing up in El Paso, this was always kind of a romantic, magical, distant place. Didn't visit it as a kid, did not until I was in college in New York. Was a rower and got a chance to come up and row on some of your rivers up here, and was just stunned by the beauty and seeing it up close. Let me tell you a little bit about where I'm from in case you're not familiar with El Paso. Beyond being beautiful, beyond being in the Chihuahuan Desert, beyond being in the Mountain West, the only city in Texas in the Mountain Time Zone, it is one half of the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere. It is connected, conjoined with Ciudad Juarez. Our street grids literally run into each other. 3 million people from 2 countries, speaking 2 languages, who were joined, not separated, by the Rio Grande River to form something far greater, far more powerful than the sum of our parts or the number of people involved. El Paso, Texas happens to be one of the safest cities in America, and it has been for the last 20 years, not despite this connection with Juarez, with Mexico, with the rest of the world, not despite the fact that 1/4 of those with whom we live in El Paso were born in another country and chose us, but it is because we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees that we are so safe, so strong, and so successful. And it is something that perhaps growing up we took for granted. We thought that that's just what we were, not just as a city, but as a country. The story that we tell ourselves, a nation of asylum seekers and refugees and immigrants. Out of many one, e pluribus unum, that's United States of America. November 2016 shattered any illusion that that was widely accepted or that that would be the course that this country would take going forward. To have a president who described Mexican immigrants in our hometown, maybe in yours as well, as rapists and criminals, though they commit crimes at a far lower rate than do those born in the United States. To hear asylum seekers who have traveled 2,000 miles, fleeing some of the deadliest places on the planet today, with their kids, on foot, atop a train, known as the Beast or La Bestia, not inside in the seats, to describe them as animals or an infestation, to try to ban all Muslims from this country. And when, in Western history, has a nation attempted to ban all people of one religion as though they are somehow inherently violent or defective, to call Klansmen and white supremacists and Nazis very fine people, we begin to understand the challenges that we have here in this country today, and not just because they offend our sensibilities or our sense of history or tradition, or what we like to think America stands for. These words are incitement to violence, to hatred. They turn into actions and policies and practices of this country. So kids in cages in my hometown, those kids of those parents who risked their very lives to bring them here to the United States because they could not stay in their hometown, in their home country, because they might lose the life of that child. That mother deported back to the very country from which she fled. That family today still separated months later with no prospect of seeing each other again. That is us. That is all of us right now. The mosque in Victoria, Texas, burned to the ground on the day that our president signed an executive order attempting to ban Muslim travel to the United States. That is all of us. A video tweeted out a week ago, last Friday, of Ilhan Omar, a Muslim member of Congress, conflating her words and her presence and her life and her faith with the attackers of 9/11. This is where our country is today. And it is on all of us to change this course if we disagree with it. Because in this democracy where the people are the government and the government is the people, the responsibility rests with each and every single one of us. And I will tell you, this is not just rhetoric. This is not just campaign language. These are words informed by your actions and the changes that I've seen already under this administration. When we were locking up kids in a tent camp in the desert in Tornillo, Texas, who had just been taken by their parents, within 24 hours when we put the call out, 1,000 people showed up in El Paso, Texas, drove out to Tornillo to bear witness, to testify to their fellow Americans just what was being done in their name. And your presence and that public pressure caused, at least temporarily, this administration to desist from the practice of taking kids from their parents. Those high school students in Parkland, Florida, who after the murders in their high school forced their government to change its laws, to raise the purchase age for a long gun, to implement red flag laws so that if you're a danger to yourself or someone else in your life, we intervene before it is too late. It was action that they took under this administration. Those of you who stood up to protect the Affordable Care Act, protections for those with pre-existing conditions, the ability for young people to stay on their parents' insurance, to prevent any kind of lifetime cap that would say that you're too medically expensive to take care of and your life does not have value. All of that has happened within this administration. Something that I'm learning in my old age of 46 years is that there is an inertia to power. It wants to continue to stay in power, accumulate power, whether that's in wealth or years in office or any way that you want to measure it or look at it. There is not, and I mistakenly believe this or internalize this over my life, an inertia to change. I just thought things were inexorably, sometimes too slowly, getting better over time. More rights, more perfect union, more equality in this country, a better understanding of our history, and greater opportunity for all. Not only is that not true, and not only can that stop or stall, but it can be reversed unless all of us own the change that we want to see in this country. And this, if there ever was in our lifetimes, doesn't matter how young or old you are, is our defining moment of truth to prove it. When you look at the challenges that we face, tens of millions of our fellow Americans unable to see a provider or take their kid to the therapist or afford their prescriptions. We were in a county in New Hampshire in the last visit, and a woman showed me her receipt for prescription medications. After her copay kicks in, it's $10,000 a year for her to be able to stay alive. Nurses who administer insulin to their diabetic patients who cannot afford insulin themselves and are rationing their care and are dying of diabetes 97 years after Canadian scientists invented insulin, sold it to the University of Toronto for $3 Canadian with no hope of profit or prospect of royalties. They just wanted to save lives. And pharmaceutical companies are making a fortune on those who are forced to pay to keep themselves alive and losing the lives of far too many. School teacher in Weatherford, Texas, died of the flu, had insurance, but did not have guaranteed care, did not have the $119, which was a copay on her flu medication. In this, the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, we do not lack for resources or medical technology. All we lack is the political will to ensure that we have guaranteed, high quality, universal health care for all. To address the challenge that I saw last time I was in New Hampshire, meeting with a mental health care provider who told me that he just treated a patient who threw a chair through a window like this one to get arrested on purpose, to go to the one place he is guaranteed care in so many parts of this country today. In my home state, the county jail system is the largest provider of mental health care services today. And in the midst of a maternal mortality crisis that is 3 times as deadly for women of color, where in too many places in this country, we have reduced the ability not just to legally obtain an abortion, but to get a cervical cancer screening or family planning help, or to see a provider of any kind. If we are going to make this country whole again, or to get to a place that we've never been to before, that we know that we deserve and can achieve, then universal guaranteed high quality healthcare has to mean primary healthcare, the affordability of your prescription medications. It's got to mean mental health care for everybody, and it has to ensure that every woman can make her own decisions about her own body and has access to the care to do that. When it comes to immigration, it's not just following this country's asylum laws that guarantee you the ability, when you have no other place to go to protect your life or the life of your kids, that you can lawfully petition for asylum, something that this president and our administration today has turned its back on, not allowing those who made that 2,000-mile journey to set foot on U.S. soil and petition for asylum, therefore pushing them in between the ports of entry, where they are arrested and detained and caged, and our current Attorney General is arguing they should be able to be held indefinitely without prospect for release. Not only should we ensure that we never again separate another family, that we reunite those families who have been separated, that we release those families who are detained because they pose no risk to us. I mentioned El Paso, one of, if not the safest cities. It continues to be one of, if not the safest cities, despite, or maybe because of all the asylum seekers who are coming to our community right now. Last night, Ulysses, my wife Amy, were serving meals to the latest arrivals who are coming to this country by the hundreds in El Paso. Doing what you would do, and I would do, if faced with the same set of conditions. And though they benefit when we follow our asylum laws, the ultimate beneficiary is this country. Whatever genius they are going to reveal over the course of their lives, they will do that here, and all of us will benefit from it. But let's also use this as an opportunity to completely, comprehensively rewrite our immigration laws in our own image, to reflect who we are, our values, the reality here in Derry, the reality in my hometown of El Paso. Not just that we are a nation of immigrants and asylum seekers, but that there are millions today living in the shadows, including more than 1 million dreamers who really, for all intents and purposes, know no other country but this one, speak no other language but English, are already contributing so much to this country's success and to its greatness. We can free them forever from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens in this, their true home country. Doing it not at the price of deporting their parents, the original dreamers, or building a 2,000-mile, 30-foot-high, $30 billion wall, which is a solution in search of a problem, but doing it because it is not only the morally correct thing to do, it is in our self-interest, because we will benefit from everything those dreamers produce in this country. If we want an economy that works for all, I'm going to make sure that we follow your lead in New Hampshire, passing paid family leave to take care of yourself, your kids, your parents, making sure that one job is enough because we pay people a living wage, winning that fight for 15, not just waging that fight for 15, and then making sure that we support unions and apprenticeships that allow young people and older people returning to the workforce, or those whose jobs have been automated out of existence, to have a trade or a skill that allows them to live with purpose and function and dignity, and to command a real paycheck at the same time that we make community college and four-year education and secondary education affordable, and help to wipe clean the debt of those holding more than $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt today, so that we can get on with our economy. They don't provide a drag on their families and a drag on the rest of us by not being able to shoulder that student loan debt that we have right now. These are some things that we can do together, and it will take all of us, because the challenges are the greatest of our lifetimes, including this last one that I'll leave you with before I answer your questions. The scientists have been very clear about this, and there is no longer even the shadow of a doubt that this planet has cooked 1 degree Celsius just since 1980. And that warming is due in large part to our emissions, our excesses, and our inaction in the face of the facts and the truth and what is really happening on this planet. Those scientists tell us that the floods that we just saw along the Missouri River, the greatest runoff into the Missouri River that we've seen since we've been keeping records about the Missouri River, that flooded farmers who were already underwater when it came to debt, that flooded the grain, flooded the soybeans that are stored because they cannot find markets overseas in the midst of these trade wars and tariffs, the 58 inches of rain that fell from the sky in Houston, Texas, which was the greatest flood we've ever had, the greatest single rain event in the recorded history of North America, and it was the third 500-year flood in just the last 5 years in Southeast Texas. Talking to the mayor of Charleston, South Carolina, who tells me every single time that it rains in Charleston, South Carolina, it floods in Charleston, South Carolina. 2 500-year storms in just the last 2 years, now 50 miles wider than they were before, dumping twice the amount of rain that they did before. We listened to our friends in California, historic wildfires, unprecedented. The farmers in the Panhandle and in West Texas, 5 years of drought, through which they will no longer be able to persist in growing the food and the fiber upon which we and so much of the world relies. All of this is going to get exponentially worse as this planet warms, and it is our kids and their kids who will reap the consequences of the decisions that we make today. Those same scientists say there are 10 years left to us to get this right, or at least better, and the worst outcomes if we do nothing. If we can free ourselves from an economy that today depends on fossil fuels, if we can invest in renewable energy like solar and wind and the jobs that come along with it, the two fastest growing occupations in the US today, wind jobs and solar jobs, if we can allow rural communities to also do their part, farmers through the Farm Bill, planting cover crops to pull more carbon out of the air, opening up technologies like precision tilling to disturb less of the carbon in the soil, making sure that agricultural practices do not pollute our waters or our air. If all of us do our part, then we can once again assume our rightful role as the indispensable nation on the world stage, convening the powers of the planet to solve an otherwise intractable problem. Not just signing back up to the Paris Climate Agreement, which we must, but bringing the world around everything that we must do together if we're going to prevent 1 more degree Celsius of temperature. These are the challenges that we should be up to. We should meet them not by half measures or by only half the country. No one person, no one political party, no one geographic region of the United States of America is going to have the answers. At this very divided, highly polarized, hyper-partisan moment, this country, history, our kids call on us to come together, to find the common ground and the common cause, and to do the common good. And for those reasons, I'm running to serve you as the next President of the United States of America. Thank you for having us out. Very, very grateful. Thank you. Appreciate it. Cynthia, you got the microphone?
Here we go. So if you raise your hand, then I will call on you. Okay, we'll pull it up.
Thank you very much. So we love to get to know our candidates personally. And we know several decades ago you're into rowing, you're into punk rock. So now, outside of work and family, what are those things you're most passionate about? What are the things that you're a fan of? Music or something else?
Thank you for the question. Great question. That's perfect, Steve. So we've got 3 kids, all of whom are playing baseball, playing basketball, playing soccer. So when I'm home, and I'm going to be home tomorrow night in El Paso, over the course of the weekend, we're going to their games, we're taking them to their practices, we're doing their science fair projects for them, because I now know as a parent that that's who's doing the science fair projects. You know, I'm a runner. I mentioned these great mountains. I love doing the trail runs around El Paso. We have the Rio Grande River. Love running along that river. But right now, believe it or not, running for president is taking a lot of our time. And so that the kids running occasionally, listening to music, reading a great book. I'm reading 2 books right now. One is this great history of the Osage in Oklahoma, Killers of the Flower Moon, which is just a powerful read on American history. The other is Uninhabitable Earth, which really just details what we're doing to this planet right now and some of the consequences. So those are some of the things that I do in my off time. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Okay, we're straight in front.
Okay,
Here we go.
thanks, Connor.
Welcome to New Hampshire again.
Thank you.
My name is Corinne Dodge. I'm a voter here in Derry. I am also representing New Hampshire Voters Restoring Democracy. We believe that the corrupting influence of excessive and secret money in our politics in New Hampshire and in the country is totally destroying our democracy. We are working.
Do we have a doctor in the house? We need some help. I have a doctor. Let her through. She's okay. We don't need to call 911. Do we want to open the door? It's a little warm. You can clear. We're going to get her outside right here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I should definitely cool off outside.
Yes, ma'am. Ali, could you do me a favor and hang out with our friend?
Coming through. Coming through now. Together, we like get shit done.
Hold on one second.
All right.
Hold on one second, please. Gotcha.
But I would love to make sure you're able to stay with us. So I'm going to ask Cynthia, who's got a car, to make sure we stay in touch going forward. Get from your first name?
Yeah, you might get people here.
Here we go.
Yes.
Yeah, got it. Thanks. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Yep. Excuse me, my friend. We can't have you right there. I'm sorry. We're gonna scoot you all the way back. Okay.
All right.
You were in the middle of your
Head back.
question.
I'm gonna step back.
I was, and thank you for going on.
Yeah.
It says a lot.
Yeah.
We believe that the corruption of excessive and secret money, we are working with legislators. We have one right here in our state house. There is a bill right now that we're voting on getting a constitutional amendment pushed in Washington. My question is going to be, first, two-part. First of all, do you support this? We believe that this corruption is stopping all those things that you want to do and all across this country, and it's stopping us and it's destroying our democracy. I have a website for this group. I would love to have you be the second presidential candidate to sign on to our pledge.
Okay.
We are affiliated. Soham has a copy of that, and he has a way to get it back to me with an envelope. I don't expect you to sign. I'd love it if you sign it right now, but as a future president, I want you to. But I want you to help us here in New Hampshire, because everyone is watching us here across the country to see what we do. We would love to get 504 passed, which is for a constitutional amendment. Then we need to get the governor for it, and it would be a real help if presidential candidates would sign on to
And
this.
this is big money in our politics and unaccountable money. And
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
So first of all, thank you for doing that, and I promise you we will read this, and thank you for giving it to Soham. I'll make sure that we get your response. I've not taken PAC money now for the last 4 or 5 years of any kind, whether it's corporations or the Sierra Club or anybody. Just I don't ever want there to be the question or the appearance that I'm working for anyone other than people, human beings. And so we're really grateful that our donations are all from people, none from lobbyists, none from corporations, none from PACs. I believe 99% below $200, so it's a small dollar donors. 99% over the internet, so getting to spend time with you instead of courting the very wealthiest in this country, or sitting before corporations and their PACs. But you're absolutely right. Everything that we want to do is dependent on our ability to get control of our democracy. Again, the Congress, the United States Congress, not too long ago passed a bill that allows internet service providers to sell your private browsing information without your consent. It makes no sense until you follow the money from the political action committees that represent the ISPs that gave to those members of Congress who voted for it. Medicare buys so much in prescription drugs for the beneficiaries, as does the VA, as does TRICARE, as does Medicaid, as does our federally insured employees. But we don't use the leverage and the purchase power to bring down the cost of medications. It is because that they've been able to purchase access and outcomes. Purdue Pharma marketed opioids as a miracle drug that was non-addictive to prescribers and to doctors. Tens of thousands of our fellow Americans have succumbed to opioid abuse and overdose. And while we have the largest prison population on the face of the planet, more than 2.2 million locked up behind bars, the majority of whom are people of color, so many there for non-violent drug crimes like possession of marijuana, which will not kill you, to which you cannot become addicted. While they're doing time, not a single executive from Purdue Pharma has spent a single night in jail or paid any meaningful consequence for what they have done related to money. So almost every challenge that you face, everything that you see counter to the will of the American people, can be explained by the problem that you are highlighting. Ro Khanna and I, a member of Congress from California, wrote a bill called the No PAC Act that would disallow members of Congress from receiving PAC money. I would say it has a 98% approval rating nationally. It has a 2% approval rating within Congress. And so we could not get the sucker passed, but we tried to walk the talk by running our campaigns in that way and hopefully setting an example. Last thing, you mentioned a constitutional amendment. 2010 Supreme Court says corporations are people, money is speech, corporations can spend unlimited amounts of money under First Amendment protections that were supposed to be for human beings to affect, and I would argue, purchase the outcomes of elections and of legislation. So we absolutely need to reverse that and make sure that the Constitution is clear on who a person is in this country. Thank you.
Hi, as a millennial and as a mom, and I'm worried about paid family leave and cost of college, all of that. However, you're going to be the head of the executive, so I have a question on U.S.-Israel relations.
Yeah.
That Netanyahu won the election and is able to maintain his position as prime minister, and with President Trump making a very about-face change in our relationship with Israel of both Republican and Democratic candidates and their presidents in the past. I guess I'm wondering, as he is looking to annex settlements in the West Bank, what you perceive specifically as the U.S.-Israel relationship going forward?
Yeah, thank you for an issue. The bottom line is, as you suggested, Republicans and Democrats' policy before this president was that we are going to pursue a two-state solution for the Palestinian people and for the Israeli people. We want Israel to be both a Jewish state and a democracy, which may very well be impossible without a two-state solution. We'll have to choose one or the other. We also want to make sure that we guarantee the safety of the people of Israel when rockets are fired indiscriminately from the Gaza Strip onto Israel. We want to make sure that they have a qualitative military advantage to make sure that they can protect that state from those who would wish to wipe it off the face of the earth. We also want to guarantee the safety and security of the Palestinian people and the human rights of everyone living in that region. Visiting the West Bank and visiting Israel a few years back, I really saw that in very human terms. I met a young Palestinian woman who said, you know what, I don't care about two states or one state. I just want to be treated with dignity. I just want to go to school. I just want to be able to work a job. I don't think that's asking too much. So to be able to meet the aspirations of people from their basic human rights and their basic human potential, the best possible solution is two states. But right now, really on both sides, we have leaders who do not reflect that interest. In Mahmoud Abbas, you don't have someone who's willing to condemn the incitement and the violence. In Netanyahu, you have someone who, though we should congratulate him for winning this last election, we should also call out that he sided with ultra-right racist parties in order to do it, that he has wanted to annex the West Bank now, which will damn any opportunity for a two-state solution. And so we've got to use our friendship with Israel, our support in the region, to ensure that we do everything we can to achieve that, but we have got our work cut out for us at this moment. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
This is going to be our last question.
So I graduated college in 2015. I'm a journalist by trade. The very first thing that I covered was the 2016 election, which was as much of a train wreck as you'd expect. And starting in 2017, I moved back here to New Hampshire. I announced that I was going to run for state representative here in New Hampshire. Between 16 and 17, I started getting nasty emails and abusive Twitter messages. Shortly after I announced I was leaving journalism for politics, I got an anonymous Tumblr message saying that because I was a reporter, I had nothing to offer and should die. So, if you are to win the presidency, what are some steps that you would take to restore civility, not only between members of the media and Americans, but within the country itself?
Great question. Doesn't help when we have a president who describes the press as the enemy of the people instead of the best defense against tyranny, which is what I have always believed and what has always been the case in the United States of America. I mentioned earlier the president's incitement, not just to hatred, but ultimately the logical conclusion of this language is to violence against our fellow Americans, undermining the institutions of our democracy, not calling out the government of Russia for seeking to thwart the 2016, the 2018, and potentially the 2020 elections, siding with Vladimir Putin instead of our intelligence community in this country, but also undermining the courts, mocking and ridiculing a Mexican-American judge for his ethnicity, saying that he cannot objectively make a decision, undermining the press, undermining federal law enforcement. So restoring faith in our institutions and in one another, acknowledging that we are doing lasting damage to ourselves. When a third grade girl in El Paso who happens to be Mexican-American asks me, why does the president hate me? Or when I tell that story in Houston and the parents of a third grade girl who happens to be Muslim says, our daughter asked us the very same thing. What we are doing to those kids' heads and their conception of themselves and what they'll be able to accomplish in this country is damaging not just to them, but to the United States of America. So we have to correct it. We can do this legislatively, and we should reverse things like a transgender troop ban to welcome the service of anyone who wants to provide it in the United States. sign into law the Equality Act, ensure protections for the press, but we also have to be very mindful of the way that we talk about one another. You will never hear me dismiss or judge somebody based on the policy that they prefer, the party to which they belong, that person to whom they pray or love, or how many generations they've been here, or whether they just got here yesterday. The fact is, at this moment, we are all Americans, and we have a challenge that will defy one party or one person. It's got to be all of us coming together. So, in my reading of the situation, the only way that we overcome all of this is by coming together at a very divided, very polarized moment. So you'll see, not just in the language that I use, but in the way that I campaign. The very first stop on the first day of this campaign was in Keokuk, Iowa. One of these communities that is far too often an afterthought, if it is thought about at all, that voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I will presume nothing about the people of Keokuk. I will show up and listen to them as we have to make sure that we're incorporating what's important to them into this election. So, listen, whatever happens over the course of this next year, I know, have faith in the fact that come summer 2020, we will all get behind the same person, whoever she or he is, to ensure that they defeat Donald Trump. And we got to help them to bring this country together and to meet these challenges. So thank you for the question. Ms. Conestola, thank you all for having us out here today. Very, very grateful. We really appreciate it. And